Bet you can't tell if that's a 372, 385, or a 390. They're all laid out pretty much the same. That's one of the nice things about these saws. It's a 390 and it needs a boot. That thing split right off, and so I think what I'm going to do here is just make a commentary on the 390s and the similarities between the 390s and the 372, both in repair but also just general layout. Same kind of inboard clutch arrangement. For that matter, some of these parts look really familiar to a guy with a 372 because some of them are the same. It's just like a 372, just a little bit bigger. That's all a 390 is. When we get the cylinder off and take a look at the layout, it'll look familiar there too. One thing I can tell you is this series of saw is one of the favorites for the professional because it's an awful lot of power in a small package. That looks familiar too, doesn't it? That muffler. So, but it's also one of the reasons I like working on these saws, is because throughout the different families there's a lot of similarities. If you can take apart a 372, you can take apart a 385, 390, because just very similar parts. So anyway, I'm going to start breaking this down. I don't know how much is going to make the video and how much is not, but one thing that does differ between the different series are these carburetors. This is off this 390, and the angle of which those holes are is different on the 390s and the 372s. Interestingly enough, a carburetor from the new X-Torqs looks an awful lot like one of these. Maybe I should go get one. You know, and one of the reasons why the similarities between models makes a difference is there's also parts interchange, and that's useful. Things like mufflers and side covers, the chain adjusters and things like that are pretty much the same. Here's one for a 372. Here's the one that came off the machine. They're effectively the same. So when you have 372s and 390s in your stable or in your things you sell, you know, you have to stock less parts or less variety of parts. Filters are different. This is a filter from the 390. Here's the 372. Obviously different. Here's a couple of carburetors from the X-Torqs. $4mm to take out the screws for the bracket on the muffler. 4mm for the bolts that hold the cylinder down to the case. 5mm to take the muffler bolts off. I use a cheater. You might ask how come I'm not using a T-handle on the muffler. I broke it. Just that simple. Not too complex. $372, $385, $390. Mufflers interchange as well. Heat shields look different. I guess I'm going to have to pull the handle. Okay. Now, what I'm trying to get to is the intake boot. To do that, the best thing to do is to pull the cylinder. And also that gives me a chance to check the piston and make sure there's been no damage, because that thing obviously was running when that boot split, which means it went lean. Boy, they're on good. See, I always break these in a cross pattern too, just like I would torque them on. I don't know if it makes any difference, but I used to do that with the cylinders heads on motorcycles as well. Nice snap. Now, since this is a saw that's going to go back to work in the real world, it's going to get a gasket. None of the fun and games we do on my personal saws. This falls into the category of a saw that counts. And, you know, in saws like this, no aftermarket. You know, straight OEM. I do notice on the new boot there's a paint mark. I don't know if that designates something. I've had a couple of these come through. I had a 385 with a split boot and this one. So I'm wondering whether or not Husqvarna changed materials or something. I don't really have any idea. All I know is this. This one's got a split boot. It's a beautiful saw, and I'm jealous because I want one of these. Alright, the cylinder comes pretty much right off. That's it. I want to take a look, just see how things are. And here are the screws to get those out of here. Now, there's absolutely no damage, so this did not suffer from its ordeal. Not quite sure I like what he's running for oil. Look at that, it's pretty dirty. No blow by. It's had some time on it. But like I said, I'm just jealous. What a beautiful saw. So I'm going to clean things back up. Here, let me get you another view. Nice oil film everywhere. This guy must be running 32-to-1. It's funny, that's an oil discussion that people go through, and I got to tell you, I run 32-to-1 in everything I have, and that every time I take it apart, I always have that nice oil film. Where a lot of times I take saws apart from guys who run, you know, the less ratios, the 50-to-1s and greater ratios, and a lot of times I pull them apart and they're dry. Even though I don't see lubrication failure, they're dry just the same. Anyway, I'm going to clean it up and put it back together. So I ended up peeling out the gasket and cleaned up the piston in the cylinder, wiped a little bit of assembly oil on it, and there is a right way and a wrong way to orient this. You see those little rubber tabs, they have to go above the alignment bosses there on the cylinder, and obviously it has to go in that orientation so that the throttle cable can go through there. Now these clamps are engineered clamps. When you tighten them up where they do that, you can't over tighten. Well, I guess, I mean, you can strip out a screw, but it's hard to over tighten them. They're pretty much designed to squeeze so far, and that's it. You know, I bought these darn things from Bailey's a bunch of years ago. Like $10 to get a set of them. They're still kicking. Little details like the rings have to have those open spots above so they capture that little pin in there. I don't know if you can see that on camera. I didn't take them off, so they're right. You know, the little details is like when you put the ring compressor on, you know, you sort of wiggle it to make sure those rings actually are seated on those pins. And I also try to get as close to that top ring as possible, so you know I don't have to push very far. And then if I'm lucky, it does that. I think I have a harder time getting the ring compressor out than I do getting the cylinder on sometimes. Making sure that gasket's right where it's supposed to be. It is. That's it. The thing is basically on. Now it's a matter of putting the screws back together and, you know, reassembling the saw. Again, 4mm. One of the things I do is when I set the cylinder screws in there is I just tip it up on its side, you know. See if this is on. Yeah, then it's easier for me to sort of snake that back in there. Get it in the hole properly. You know, if you work straight from the top, a lot of times you'll play that game. And of course, unless you have something that makes it sticky, it will just drop right off your Allen wrench. And of course, I never tighten them. I just bring them down to where they're not even snug, just where they make contact. But you know, I'll repeat myself over and over again. One of the reasons I really like having these and working on these Husqvarnas is just really how easy it is to work on those things. You know, the 372s, the 350s, the 346s, all of them. The new saws, I don't know yet, but this generation, the 300 generation, I just love them. These things are just awesome machines. So anyway, cylinder is mounted, seated, intake bracket is on. You know, everything's pretty much where it's supposed to be. Throttle will go right in there. Do a cross pattern like you would with a motorcycle. Pretty much anything. And I do it in stages. I don't just go and crank on them. Again, this is just me. There's some people who a little bit less, they might save time. I don't know. But I start out with just a firm cross pattern and I build them up. Of course, with a camera I can't move it around quite as well. And once I got them firm, that's when I reef on them. The other thing I'm going to do is once I get this thing together, you know, I'm going to warm it up. You know, let it cool, warm it up, give it a couple of heat cycles before I give it back to the customer. And then I'm going to also tighten these cylinder bolts after I've done that. I know that's overkill. And to the efficient shop, they'd say, you know something? It's money you don't have to spend. Once upon a time, I used to be an engineer, and that's both a blessing and a curse. I'm not sure what the blessing is, but the curse is, I overanalyze everything. You know, when I do these builds. The exhaust gasket goes between the muffler and the shield. But what I'll do is I'll set it up this way. I'll stick it on that way where I can see it from behind the muffler. Then I can get the muffler bolts just started. And the second thing I do is, before I do the final tightening on the muffler bolts itself, is I'll leave them firm and I'll put these in, these little guys. Because sometimes, especially if you're using, boy, I hate to use this word, aftermarket parts, a lot of times those holes don't align just upright. So until you get all the screws in there, you gotta leave things a little loose so they can slop around. Of course, with OEM, that's not a problem. Yet another reason OEM makes sense, and I'm gonna say this while it's on video. Typical shop, they want to do just like this. They want to take the saw apart, put parts on there and put it back together, and know that when they're done, they've got something done that they can give back to the customer and not worry about it. And with OEM parts, you have a much higher chance of that being the case than with the aftermarket parts. You know, if you have to sit there and muck around with whether or not it fits right and changing where the holes are and all that, the money you may have saved on the upfront price of those parts, you just lost in the time it takes to make them fit. Now, if you're a hobbyist, that's a whole different deal. You know, then you don't care. Your time isn't measured that way. Gotta get those good and tight. Same with these. So there's the cylinder. You know, I can tell you right now that taking one of these all the way down, putting a cylinder on it and put it back up is going to take less time for me than actually editing the darn video that's going to be the result. While I'm here, can't forget the little ring that goes in right there. It's got flat spots on the side. You got to make sure you match up the flat spots to the flat spots that are on the manifold of the boot. Carburetor. Carburetor is pretty simple, and I typically make sure the choke is on that way so it fits inside easier. Fuel line, pulse line. This is a new saw, so I don't feel like I have to replace those. When I did the initial analysis, I did, in fact, pull them out just to see what I have. While you don't have the nuts and bolts in there, sometimes it's easier to hook up the throttle cable. Pretty much standard fare. Don't forget to put the little spacers in there, which I had just done. Choke just pops right in like that. Fuel line, pulse line, and that's essentially it. Not a whole lot more. Check function. Yeah, everything pretty much works. Okay, we're back out in the shop. Basically getting ready to finish off this operation just to see if it fires up. There's the saw. Put the handle back on, put the cylinder on. In order to change that boot, you had to remove the carburetor, remove the cylinder, which means you had to remove the muffler and the handle and all that. Ah, boy. And that's really 20 minutes, maybe. These things come apart in your hands. They're about the easiest things to work on the planet for saws. I'm going to put the cover on and just get it fired up. And then we'll put the tack on and get it set up. I don't know if I'd mentioned it before. I think I did. But one of the beauties of this series of saws is these coupled with the 70cc series, the 372s. There's some parts commonality. The controls are the same. So if you have a series of loggers or you have to support a series of saws, what an excellent family of saws to work with. Get fired up and see what we have for running. I just finished doing a video on tachometers, you know, and I've got a few of them. One of the things I like about this one, the DTI here, is it actually has a battery you can change. A lot of those cheaper ones, they run for a couple of years, the battery dies, but there's no way of getting inside and changing the battery. Another feature I like about this one, it's made in the USA. And another feature I like about this is the fact that it has that stop button where you get the top RPM of a particular test set, where you can get a real number versus speculate based on what you see bouncing around on the screen. I run 32-to-1 mix in all my 2-strokes, and either use Bel-Ray H1R or the Husqvarna XP synthetic. My choice. I've had no problems with either one of them. I'm going to start talking about that at a different point in time. That should be enough to get it started. Remember, that carburetor is empty. That was pretty good. Think about it for a second. I had cleaned out that carburetor, and I also had cleaned out that fuel line, at least checked it. So there was no gasoline in either the carburetor or the fuel line in what, 3 pulls it started going. To tune these and the X-Torqs, you have to have both the tachometer and one of these special spline wrenches. And yeah, I'll put the boot back in there at some point. I just want to have easy access to the carb right now. Here, we'll try this again. I set that little rubber boot in there. Now I'll put the cover on. And then we'll try giving it a start and quick tune. Alright, now let's see what we have. That's good enough for now. I'm going to run it for a little bit and then set it up again. Got something to start with here. And this guy now has a saw. So I'm going to wrap it up at this, and then I'll do a final tune-up and put it out the door afterwards. But so there it is, inside a 390. How's that for a title for the video series? And some more comments on the tachometers. Let me see if I got a couple handy right here. This is another one, Tiny Tack, and I've got one of those gray ones you get from Husqvarna. I don't know how you change the batteries on that. I think once it runs out, it's done. That's like 50 bucks, you know. And these guys right here, $100, but I can change batteries. That magic button, that means something to me. The ones that you hold in proximity, like this one here, or the other one I have, like you probably saw here, you see wandering numbers, so you sort of have to extrapolate what the top RPM is. But having that button on this one give you the number right off the bat there, that tells you exactly what the top number is, and that really means something to me. I want to make sure I don't over rev these things. So anyway, like I said, I'll put this saw together and do a final tune another day. It's running now. What I do is I'll tune them up, and then I'll make sure it goes cold, and then I'll try to pull start them. It's got to start in a couple of pulls, and then after I run it for a little bit, give it a load, I shut it off, and without any throttle, without any choke, it needs to start in the first pull before it goes out of my shop. So anyway, talk to you later. Bye for now.